When millionaire Alexander Sterling saw 9-year-old Isaiah fumbling with his prized crystal puzzle cube, he couldn't help but chuckle. The janitor's son had no business touching a $3,000 collector's item that had stumped MIT graduates. But when the quiet boy's fingers began moving across the transparent surfaces with impossible precision, solving patterns that had baffled experts for months, Alexander's laughter died in his throat. What happened next would shatter everything. He thought he knew about intelligence, family, and the boy whose deep brown eyes held secrets that would change both their lives forever. Isaiah Washington pressed his small face against the cool glass of the elevator as it climbed to the 47th floor of Sterling Tower. He had never been this high up before, and the city below looked like a miniature world made of toy buildings and tiny cars. "Remember what I told you, baby," his mother Grace whispered, adjusting his school backpack. "Stay quiet, don't touch anything, and sit in the corner with your homework while I work." Welcome to the Black Side Stories. Before we continue, tell me in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, subscribe to our channel and help us share their stories. Isaiah nodded solemnly. At 9 years old, he was used to these rules. When the babysitter got sick or school ended early, he sometimes had to come to work with his mama. She cleaned the fancy offices at Sterling Tower, one of the tallest buildings in the city. "Yes, ma'am," he said softly. "I brought my math book and my reading assignment." The elevator doors opened with a gentle chime, revealing a hallway that looked like something from a movie. The walls were covered in dark wood panels, and paintings in golden frames hung between tall windows. The carpet was so thick that Isaiah's sneakers sank into it like he was walking on clouds. "This is where Mr. Sterling works," Grace explained as they walked down the long hallway. "He owns the whole building, maybe the whole block. He's very important and very busy, so if we see him, you just look down and keep walking, okay?" "Okay, Mama." They stopped at massive double doors made of polished wood. Grace used her key card to unlock them, and they stepped into an office that took Isaiah's breath away. The room was enormous, with windows from floor to ceiling that showed the entire city. A desk the size of their kitchen table sat in the center, surrounded by leather chairs and glass cabinets filled with strange and beautiful objects. "Wow," Isaiah breathed, forgetting to be quiet. "Shoo," Grace reminded him gently. "Come on, let's get you set up." She led him to a small seating area in the corner where a leather couch faced a coffee table made of black glass. Isaiah sat down and pulled out his homework, but his eyes kept wandering around the incredible room. There were model airplanes on shelves, awards in glass cases, and books that looked older than his grandmother. But what caught his attention most was something sitting on a side table near the windows. It looked like a cube made of crystal or clear glass, about the size of a softball. Even from across the room, Isaiah could see that it was filled with intricate patterns, twisted metal pieces, colored spheres, and geometric shapes that seemed to float inside the transparent walls. Grace began dusting the bookshelves, humming softly to herself. The afternoon sun streamed through the giant windows, making rainbows dance across the walls. Isaiah tried to focus on his math worksheet, but his eyes kept drifting back to the mysterious crystal cube. What was it? Some kind of decoration? A paperweight? The more he looked at it, the more curious he became. The pieces inside seemed to form patterns, like they were meant to be arranged in a certain way. It reminded him of the wooden puzzles his grandfather used to make, except much more complicated and beautiful. After an hour of stealing glances at the cube, Isaiah couldn't stand it anymore. He looked over at his mother, who was now cleaning the windows on the far side of the office. She was wearing headphones and humming along to her music, completely absorbed in her work. Just a quick look, Isaiah told himself. He wouldn't touch it, just examine it up close. He tiptoed across the thick carpet to the side table. Up close, the cube was even more amazing than he had imagined. It wasn't just clear glass. It was made of some kind of crystal that caught the light and threw it back in brilliant flashes. Inside, dozens of small metal pieces were suspended in what looked like liquid, creating complex three-dimensional patterns. There were silver spheres, golden pyramids, copper spirals, and pieces that Isaiah couldn't even name. Some were connected by thin wires. Others seemed to float freely. The whole thing looked like a miniature universe trapped inside a crystal box. Isaiah circled the table, studying the cube from every angle. Gradually, he began to see that it wasn't random at all. There was a pattern, a logic to how the pieces were arranged. Some were clearly in the right place, but others looked wrong, like they had been moved out of position. It's a puzzle, he realized with growing excitement. A three-dimensional puzzle that could be solved by moving the pieces into the correct arrangement. What do you think you're doing? Isaiah jumped so high he nearly knocked over a lamp. He spun around to see a tall man in an expensive suit standing in the doorway. The man had silver hair, sharp blue eyes, and the kind of presence that made the huge office seem suddenly smaller. This had to be Mr. Sterling himself. I'm sorry, sir. Isaiah stammered, his heart pounding. I wasn't touching it. I was just looking. Alexander Sterling strode into his office, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the hardwood floor near the entrance. He looked at the small boy standing frozen by his prized possession, then over at Grace, who had pulled off her headphones and was hurrying toward them with panic in her eyes. Mr. Sterling, I'm so sorry, Grace said breathlessly. Isaiah, get away from there right now. Come sit down. But Alexander held up a hand, stopping her. His cold blue eyes were fixed on Isaiah with a mixture of amusement and irritation. So you think you can figure out my puzzle, do you? Alexander asked, his voice dripping with condescension. Do you have any idea what that is, boy? Isaiah shook his head, not trusting his voice. That, Alexander said, walking over to stand beside the cube, is a Prometheus paradox. There are only 12 of them in the world, and they cost more than most people make in a year. It was designed by a team of mathematicians and engineers at MIT, and it's considered one of the most difficult puzzles ever created. He picked up the cube, handling it like it was made of precious gems. I've had 3 different puzzle experts work on this for months. None of them have been able to solve it. And you think you can just walk over here and figure it out? Alexander chuckled, but it wasn't a kind sound. I suppose next you'll tell me you're some kind of genius. Isaiah's cheeks burned with embarrassment. No, sir. I thought it looked like a puzzle. It looked like a puzzle, Alexander repeated mockingly. Well, aren't you observant? Mr. Sterling, please, Grace interrupted, her voice tight with worry. Isaiah didn't mean any harm. He's a good boy. He just gets curious sometimes. Curious? Alexander mused, still studying Isaiah with those sharp eyes. Well, since he's so curious, maybe we should satisfy that curiosity. He set the cube back on the table and crossed his arms. Go ahead, boy. Show me how smart you think you are. Solve my impossible puzzle. Isaiah looked at his mother, whose face had gone pale. This felt like a trap, like there was no right answer. If he failed, Mr. Sterling would think he was stupid. If he didn't try, Mr. Sterling would think he was a coward. I don't know if I can, sir, Isaiah said quietly, but I'd like to try. Alexander's smile was cold. By all means, take your time. I'll just sit here and watch the show. He settled into his leather desk chair, clearly expecting to be entertained by watching a 9-year-old fail spectacularly at something that had stumped experts. Grace started to protest again, but Isaiah was already approaching the cube. He had never backed down from a puzzle in his life, and he wasn't about to start now. Even if this one cost more than his family's card, he picked up the Prometheus paradox with careful hands. It was heavier than he expected and warm to the touch. The crystal surface was perfectly smooth, but as he turned it, he could feel tiny vibrations, like the pieces inside were eager to move. The first thing Isaiah noticed was that the cube could be opened. There were almost invisible seams in the crystal, dividing it into sections that could slide and rotate. As he explored the mechanism, pieces inside began to shift and flow, responding to his movements. Alexander expected the boy to fumble around randomly, trying moves without any real understanding. What he saw instead made him sit forward in his chair. Isaiah wasn't just moving pieces randomly. His fingers seemed to know exactly where to go, sliding panels and rotating sections with growing confidence. His eyes were completely focused, studying the internal patterns with an intensity that seemed impossible for someone his age. Interesting, Alexander murmured. Despite himself, the first few minutes were exploratory, with Isaiah getting a feel for how the puzzle worked. But then something changed. His movements became faster, more decisive. Pieces that had been tangled and chaotic began to form recognizable patterns. Grace watched from across the room, her hands clasped together in prayer. She had seen this look on her son's face before, when he worked on the wooden puzzles his grandfather made, or when he arranged his toys in complex patterns that seemed to follow rules only he understood. 10 minutes passed. Alexander's amusement was fading, replaced by genuine curiosity. The boy was actually making progress, organizing the internal structure in ways that the MIT experts hadn't thought of. 20 minutes. Isaiah's forehead was creased with concentration, but his hands moved with increasing speed and confidence. Golden pyramids aligned with silver spheres, copper spirals wound through geometric frameworks, and the chaotic jumble inside the cube began to transform into something beautiful and ordered. "This is impossible," Alexander whispered. 30 minutes. Isaiah made a series of rapid movements, his fingers dancing across the crystal surfaces. Inside the cube, the final pieces clicked into place with an almost musical sound. The random collection of metal shapes had become a perfect, symmetrical mandala that seemed to glow with its own inner light. Isaiah set the solved Prometheus paradox on the table and looked up at Alexander with quiet satisfaction. "Done," he said simply. The room was completely silent. Alexander stared at the cube, then at Isaiah, then back at the cube. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. That's impossible," he finally managed. "You couldn't have. Nobody has ever." He picked up the cube with shaking hands, examining the perfect solution from every angle. It was flawless. Not only had Isaiah solved the puzzle, he had done it faster than anyone had thought possible. "How?" Alexander demanded. "How did you do that?" Isaiah shrugged, suddenly looking like the 9-year-old he was. "I don't know, sir. I just saw how the pieces wanted to fit together." "Wanted to fit together?" Alexander repeated faintly. "Yes, sir. Like they were telling me where they belonged." Grace approached slowly, still hardly believing what she had witnessed. "Isaiah, baby, that was incredible." Alexander sank back into his chair, his entire worldview shifting. This wasn't possible. A child from the projects, the son of his janitor, had just accomplished something that had defeated some of the brightest minds in the country. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Isaiah Washington, sir." "Isaiah." Alexander rolled the name around in his mouth like he was tasting it. "Tell me, Isaiah, do you like puzzles?" "Yes, sir. My grandpa used to make them for me out of wood. And I like the ones on cereal boxes and the ones in kids' magazines." "Have you ever taken an intelligence test?" Isaiah looked confused. "No, sir." "What's that?" Alexander was quiet for a long moment, studying the boy who had just turned his understanding of intelligence upside down. Finally, he reached for his phone. "Dr. Martinez? It's Alexander Sterling. I need you to come to my office immediately." "No, cancel whatever you're doing. I have someone here you need to meet." He hung up and looked at Isaiah with new eyes. "Dr. Martinez is a psychologist who specializes in gifted children. She's going to want to give you some tests." "Am I in trouble?" Isaiah asked nervously. For the first time since entering his office, Alexander smiled genuinely. "No, son, you're not in trouble. You might be the most remarkable child I've ever met." An hour later, Dr. Elena Martinez arrived with a briefcase full of tests and puzzles. She was a kind woman with curly gray hair and gentle brown eyes, and she immediately put Isaiah at ease. "Hello, Isaiah," she said warmly. "Mr. Sterling tells me you're very good with puzzles." "I like them," Isaiah admitted shyly. Dr. Martinez opened her briefcase and pulled out a series of increasingly complex puzzles, wooden brain teasers, metal wire problems, pattern recognition tests, and spatial reasoning challenges. One by one, Isaiah solved them all with the same focused intensity he had shown with the Prometheus paradox. "Remarkable," Dr. Martinez murmured as Isaiah completed a puzzle that typically took adults an hour to solve. He had finished it in 12 minutes. She gave him written tests next, pattern sequences, logical reasoning problems, and mathematical puzzles designed for much older children. Isaiah worked through them methodically, his pencil moving steadily across the pages. When the testing was finished, Dr. Martinez asked to speak with Alexander privately. They stepped into the hallway, leaving Isaiah with his mother. "Mr. Sterling," Dr. Martinez said quietly, "that child is extraordinary. His spatial intelligence scores are off the charts, literally off the charts. I've never seen anything like it." "What does that mean exactly?" "It means he has a gift that occurs in maybe 1 in 10 million people. He can visualize complex three-dimensional relationships in his mind, manipulate them, and find solutions that escape even trained mathematicians and engineers. Alexander felt like he was in a dream, but he's just a child, the son of a janitor. Dr. Martinez gave him a sharp look. Intelligence doesn't care about your bank account, Mr. Sterling. Some of the most brilliant minds in history came from humble backgrounds. What matters is what we do with gifts like this. What are you suggesting? This boy needs specialized education, challenges that match his abilities, and mentors who understand how to nurture exceptional talent. Without proper guidance, gifts like this can be wasted. Alexander looked through the glass doors at Isaiah, who was showing his mother how one of the puzzles worked. What would that involve? The best schools, specialized tutoring, exposure to advanced mathematics and engineering concepts. It wouldn't be cheap. Money isn't an issue, Alexander said immediately. But would his family agree to something like that? Dr. Martinez smiled. Why don't we ask them? Back in the office, Alexander knelt down so he was at eye level with Isaiah. Son, Dr. Martinez tells me you have a very special kind of intelligence. How would you like to learn more about puzzles and mathematics and engineering? Isaiah's eyes lit up. Really? I could learn more, much more. But it would mean going to different schools, working with special teachers, maybe traveling to universities and research centers. Isaiah looked at his mother uncertainly. Would you come with me, Mama? Grace's eyes were filled with tears. She looked at Alexander, then at Dr. Martinez, then back at her son. Baby, this sounds like an amazing opportunity. But these things cost money we don't have. That's not a problem, Alexander said firmly. I'd like to sponsor Isaiah's education. Consider it an investment in the future. Sir, I can't let you do that, Grace protested. We can't accept charity. It's not charity, Alexander replied. It's recognizing talent and making sure it doesn't go to waste. Your son has a gift that could change the world someday. It would be a crime to let it languish because of circumstances beyond his control. Grace was quiet for a long time, looking at her son's hopeful face. Finally, she nodded. If this is what Isaiah wants, and if you're sure about the opportunity, I'm sure, Alexander said. More sure than I've been about anything in years. That evening, after Grace and Isaiah had gone home, Alexander sat alone in his office, staring at the solved Prometheus paradox. He picked up his phone and called his brother David, a professor at Stanford. David, I need to ask you something, and I need you to listen carefully. What's going on, Alex? Do you remember Maria Santos? There was a long pause. Maria? Of course I remember her. She worked as your assistant about 10 years ago. Beautiful woman, very intelligent. What? Do you remember when she left? She just disappeared one day. Said she had a family emergency and had to move back home. You were devastated, if I recall correctly. Alexander closed his eyes. David, I think I may have a son. What? Alex, what are you talking about? The boy I told you about, the one who solved the puzzle. His mother's name is Grace Washington, but when I really looked at her today, David, I think Grace Washington used to be Maria Santos. That's impossible. You would have recognized her. Would I? She's older. Her hair is different. She's been working as a janitor instead of a corporate assistant. People change, David. But this boy, Isaiah, he has my eyes. And when he solved that puzzle, it reminded me of how I used to work through engineering problems. David was quiet for a moment. Alex, even if that's true, why would she have left? Why would she have kept your son from you? Alexander thought about the man he had been 10 years ago, driven, ambitious, sometimes cold. He thought about the way he had treated Isaiah initially, with condescension and dismissal. Maybe she had her reasons, he said quietly. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Dr. Martinez arranged for Isaiah to visit several prestigious schools and educational programs. Alexander watched in amazement as his son, and he was increasingly certain that Isaiah was his son, impressed every teacher and professor they at the Mathematics Institute. Isaiah solved problems that graduate students struggled with. At the Engineering Academy, he designed elegant mechanical solutions that made seasoned professionals shake their heads in wonder. At the Puzzle Museum, he worked through historical brain teasers that had stumped people for centuries. But more importantly, Alexander began to know Isaiah as a person. The boy was curious about everything, kind to everyone he met, and eager to learn. He had his mother's gentle nature and what Alexander was beginning to recognize as his own analytical mind. Grace remained polite but distant, clearly uncomfortable. With the attention and opportunities being lavished on her son, Alexander caught her looking at him sometimes with an expression he couldn't quite read, part gratitude, part wariness, part something else entirely. Finally, he couldn't stand it anymore. One evening, after Isaiah had fallen asleep in the back seat during the drive home from another school visit, Alexander pulled over and turned to face Grace. "Maria," he said quietly. Grace went very still. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do. Maria Santos. You worked for me from 2012 to 2014. You left suddenly, said there was a family emergency." Grace stared straight ahead, her hands clenched in her lap. "That wasn't me. Your eyes haven't changed, Maria. And Isaiah has mine." A tear rolled down Grace's cheek. "Please don't." "Don't what? Don't ask why you left? Don't ask why you kept my son from me for 9 years? Don't ask why you changed your name and took a job cleaning offices in the same building where you used to be an executive assistant?" Grace finally looked at him, and Alexander saw a decade of pain and fear in her eyes. "Because I was terrified." "Of what?" "Of you. Of your world. Of what would happen to our baby if people knew." Alexander felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. "You were afraid of me? You were my boss, Alexander. You were rich and powerful and white, and I was your Latina assistant from East L. A. When I realized I was pregnant, all I could think about was what people would say. That I was after your money, that I had seduced you for personal gain, that our child would never be accepted in your world. So you left. I ran. I changed my name, moved across the city, took whatever work I could find. I told myself I was protecting Isaiah from a world that would never see him as anything more than a scandal." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the weight of her words. "And now I see how you look at him, how proud you are of his abilities. Now I see that maybe I was wrong about some things." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "But I also see how you looked at him that first day, before you knew what he could do. The condescension, the assumption that he was just another poor kid who didn't belong in your office." Alexander winced, remembering his initial reaction to Isaiah. "You're right. I was horrible that day. You were being yourself. The version of yourself that I was afraid of. I've changed, Maria. Becoming successful, building my company. Somewhere along the way, I forgot what really mattered. But watching Isaiah these past weeks, seeing the world through his eyes, it's reminded me of who I used to be, who I want to be again." Grace studied his face in the dim light from the street lamps. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to be Isaiah's father. Not just financially, but really be his father. I want to be part of his life, help him grow up, teach him things, learn from him." "And what about me?" Alexander's voice was very soft. "I want you to be part of my life too. I never stopped loving you, Maria. I never understood why you left, but I never stopped hoping you'd come back." Grace was crying now, 10 years of fear and loneliness finally breaking free. "I never stopped loving you either. But I was so scared, and then so much time passed." "We can't change the past," Alexander said, reaching over to take her hand. "But we can choose what happens next." In the back seat, Isaiah stirred in his sleep, mumbling something about golden pyramids and silver spheres. 3 months later, the Sterling family moved into a house that was big enough for all of them, but still felt like home. It wasn't Alexander's mansion. They had decided that was too formal, too intimidating. Instead, they found a comfortable place with a big yard where Isaiah could play and a workshop in the garage where Alexander could teach him about engineering. Isaiah thrived in his new school, where teachers understood how to challenge his exceptional abilities while still letting him be a child. He made friends with other gifted kids, joined the robotics club, and spent his afternoons working on increasingly complex puzzles and problems. But his favorite time was still the evenings when the three of them sat together in the living room. Alexander would help with homework that most parents couldn't understand. Grace would tell stories about her childhood in Mexico, and Isaiah would show them both the latest puzzle he'd solved or invention he'd designed. "Dad," Isaiah said one evening, looking up from a mechanical contraption he was building, "do you ever wonder why some people are good at different things?" Alexander considered the question seriously. "What do you mean?" "Like, I'm good at puzzles, but Emma at school is good at music, and Marcus is good at writing stories. Why aren't we all good at the same things?" "I think," Alexander said slowly. That everyone has different gifts so that we can help each other. If we were all good at the same things, who would do all the other important work in the world? Isaiah nodded thoughtfully. Like how Mama is good at taking care of people, and you're good at building companies, and I'm good at figuring out how things work. Exactly. We all have our part to play. But what if someone's gifts aren't recognized? Isaiah asked. What? If people think they're not important because of where they come from or what they look like? Alexander and Grace exchanged a look over their son's head. At 9 years old, Isaiah was already thinking about questions that many adults never considered. That's why it's important to look deeper, Grace said gently. To see people for who they really are, not just what they appear to be on the surface. Like how you saw that I was good at puzzles, even though I'm just a kid. You're not just anything, Isaiah, Alexander said firmly. You're brilliant and kind and curious. And those qualities have nothing to do with your age or your background. They come from who you are inside. Isaiah smiled and went back to his invention, satisfied with the answer. Later that night, after Isaiah had gone to bed, Alexander and Grace sat on the porch watching the stars. Do you ever regret it? Grace asked, taking on the responsibility of a ready-made family. Alexander pulled her closer. The only thing I regret is the 9 years I missed. But maybe those years were necessary. Maybe I needed to become the kind of man who could be the father Isaiah deserves and the partner you deserve. He's going to do amazing things, Grace said softly. He already is. Every day he amazes me with his curiosity, his compassion, his ability to see solutions where others see only problems. Just like his father, Grace said with a smile, and sighed. The house. Isaiah lay in his bed staring at the ceiling. On his nightstand sat the Prometheus paradox, which Alexander had given him as a gift. But Isaiah wasn't thinking about puzzles or problems or the advanced mathematics course he would start next week. He was thinking about how lucky he was to have found his complete family, and how the most beautiful solutions weren't always the ones you could hold in your hands. Sometimes the most important puzzles were the ones involving people's hearts, and those took time and patience and love to solve. But when you finally got all the pieces in the right place, the result was more beautiful than any crystal cube or mathematical equation. It was home point 6 months later. Isaiah Washington Sterling stood on a stage at the National Mathematics Competition, holding a trophy that was almost as tall as he was. In the audience, his parents watched with tears of pride streaming down their faces. And our youngest competitor ever, the announcer said, has not only won first place in the spatial reasoning category, but has also proposed a new method for solving three-dimensional puzzles that has impressed our panel of judges. Isaiah looked out at the crowd and found his parents' faces. Alexander gave him a thumbs up, and Grace blew him a kiss in his acceptance speech. Isaiah said something that would be quoted in newspapers and educational journals for years to come. I want to thank my mom for teaching me that intelligence comes in many forms, and my dad for showing me that everyone deserves a chance to show what they can do. But mostly, I want to thank them both for proving that the best solutions happen when people choose to see past the surface and look for the good in each other. The audience erupted in applause, but Isaiah only had eyes for his parents, who were clapping harder than anyone else. That night, they celebrated at Isaiah's favorite restaurant. Not an expensive place, but a small family diner where the waitress knew his name and always brought him extra whipped cream on his pie. So what's next? Alexander asked as they sat in their favorite booth. Isaiah grinned, his face smudged with chocolate. I want to design puzzles that help other kids learn, and maybe invent some new kinds of brain teasers. And definitely keep working on that robot I'm building in the garage. Sounds like a plan, Grace said, ruffling his hair. But mostly, Isaiah added seriously, I want to help other kids like me. Kids whose gifts might not be recognized because of where they come from or what people expect from them. Alexander felt his chest swell with pride. His son wasn't just intellectually gifted. He had the heart of someone who would use his abilities to make the world better. I think, Alexander said, that's the most important puzzle of all. Outside the diner, the city lights twinkled like stars, and inside, a family that had been broken apart by fear and misunderstanding had found their way back together through love, patience, and the simple act of looking beyond the surface to see the extraordinary gifts that exist in the most unexpected places. Sometimes the most valuable things in life aren't the ones that cost the most money. Sometimes they're the ones that cost the most courage. The courage to see past prejudice, to admit when you're wrong, and to believe that everyone deserves a chance to shine. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that courage leads you to discover that the greatest treasure of all has been right in front of you all along, just waiting for someone wise enough to recognize its true worth. This has been the Black Side Stories. Until next time, remember, behind every great achievement is someone who stood watch, someone who believed, someone who preserved what matters when no one else was looking.